Welcome to the Plenteous Redemption podcast, where the cross and the culture are on a collision course for discussion.
For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. Unto the Jews a stumbling block, unto the Greeks foolishness, but unto them which are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God.
Now, here's your host, Thomas Irvin.
South African natives varied in physical stature and culture. The Bushmen were uncompromising and hostile. The Hottentots eventually came to be subject to the Europeans. Before European presence, the hostility of the South African natives was exercised one upon another. The Hottentots continually clamored amongst themselves, rarely able to get along. Yet all tribes feared the Bushmen. The Bushmen inhabited the mountainous region of South Africa. They continually attacked other tribes, stealing their cattle and anything else they could get their hands on. They were known for their indiscriminate use of poisonous arrows. The Bushmen were very aggressive. An expedition of European explorers were traveling northward from the Cape of Good Hope. When night was upon them, they settled down to rest from their journey. As the members of this expedition lay around the fire, they were suddenly showered with poisonous arrows. In another instance, a group of Dutchmen had been bartering with a group of Hottentots in the region of Bushman territory. They came to an agreement that allowed the Dutchmen to purchase cattle. As the Dutchmen made their way back to the Cape, they were confronted by a group of Bushmen. Now, the Dutch made several attempts to peacefully satisfy this group of hostiles, but they would not be appeased. The Bushmen began to attack, requiring the Dutchmen to line up in formation and began to fire volleys on the Bushmen. When more than a few of the Bushmen were wounded to death, the attack ceased and they disappeared into the scenery. The Bushmen are believed to have been aboriginal to South Africa. They occupied large portions of this territory before the Hottentots and the Namaquas began to move into the area. It was said the Bushmen had no other means of sustenance than to plunder. Whatsoever they gained, they stole by bloody force from the Hottentots or anyone else that was around. Their manner of living was extensively primitive, and as such, resulted in aggressive predatory attacks on other South African natives. They would, without conscience, murder women and children, then set fire to their homes. This aggression was then turned toward the Europeans when they arrived. The nomadic Boers were often forced to take the law, or the lack thereof, into their own hands. The Bushman attacks began to escalate and often became more gruesome over time. This, of course, led to retaliation by the Dutch farmers. Initial resistance from these farmers were mostly small-scale responses. Typically, the family of the person killed by the Bushmen would band together and exact revenge. But increased attacks by the Bushmen led to larger, more organized attacks by the Europeans. These organized groups made it their self-imposed duty to deal with the hostilities of the Bushmen. Now, of course, this was no light task. The rough terrain, the oft lack of needed supplies, the harsh weather, all coupled with the danger of following the Bushmen into their own territory. The Bushmen made stealthy use of their fastnesses. If they wished to remain hidden, they could easily do so. From these hidden positions, they would fire poisonous arrows at their enemies, causing great fear and confusion. Yet the Europeans were steadfast in their pursuit. The Bushmen would fire their arrows from a hidden position, then a battle would ensue. Typically, a few Europeans would be wounded, maybe a few would die, but many Bushmen would lose their lives. Yet they were not intimidated, and the raids by the Dutch farmers rarely secured peace. Bushman attacks increased, and in response, the Dutch raids also increased. This organization of Dutch farmers began what came to be known as the commando system in South Africa. Early on, these commandos were unofficial. They had no government attachment. They were simply farmers who had grown weary with the frequent attacks by this unreasonable band of natives. The presence of the Dutch government was primarily at the Cape during this time, so they had little governance over the areas outside the Cape Colony. Prompt action was necessary to save lives, and the Cape Colony was unable to provide soldiers to assist with this matter. Two options became available: allow the Bushmen to murder the other South African tribes and European settlers, or organize and fight back. Eventually, the government at the Cape got involved in a limited fashion. They identified the most trustworthy of the Boer farmers and deputized them. These deputized farmers would then become responsible for organizing men and exacting justice when necessary. The Cape government instructed them to go as far as possible to avoid hostilities. Yet it became clear spoliation was a way of life for the Bushmen. The settlers were equally determined to live and keep their families safe. They began to clear large portions of territories of the murderous bands of Bushmen. The organized groups of commandos consisted of armed Dutch farmers as well as armed Hottentots frustrated with the constant attacks. The commando system became a permanent fixture. Local farmers may be called upon at any time to assist with Bushman hostilities. It was an early version of what we know as the National Guard. The farmers were reluctant oftentimes to engage in such duties. They simply wanted to live peaceable lives. Yet these Bushmen would not allow such peace to exist. Reports were often written by the deputized and trusted commando leaders. They had to be sent back to the Cape Colony for government review. From 1785 to 1795, the reports revealed the Bushmen killed 309 horses. They also killed 1,891 cattle, and they stole 16,742. They killed 3,895 sheep, and they stole 73,281. They murdered 276 people. Now, in response to this, the commandos killed 2,504 Bushmen and took 669 of them captive. They stole nothing from them. During the height of this, the Netherlands East India Company lost its authority over the Cape Colony. The British Empire moved in and took control of the Cape. As a result of this change of guard, a less hostile and more humane approach began to be taken towards the Bushmen. In the northeastern districts, the settlers began to establish friendships with the Bushmen. Their efforts were slow going, but some success was achieved. Murders and robberies began to reduce in number. These efforts would then be further facilitated when missionaries began to establish mission stations amongst the Bushmen and the Hottentots. This was the state of affairs in 1795. The British had taken control of the Cape. The Bushmen were becoming more friendly. though their murderous activity did continue for years. Missionaries were beginning to settle in South Africa. By December of 1795, a young man was born who would come to be known as the Friend of the African. Born in East Lothian, Scotland, his life would span the first 7 decades of the 19th century. By the age of 11, his family moved to Coranshore. He received 3 years of schooling in Falkirk. A common theme often runs in the lives of great men that serve God. Robert Moffat had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, all of whom spent the long winter evenings with a faithful mother. A mother who understood her responsibility to sow the good seed into the hearts and minds of her children at a young age. Her gentle influence became a means of training for Moffat's future. The children would gather by the fireside, learning to knit and sew. All the while, their mother would engage them in missionary stories of that day. She took great interest in missionary publications. The descriptions given of the work and sufferings of the pioneer laborers in heathen lands, specifically of the Moravians in Greenland and East Indies, were often the topic of discussion on those cold evenings. Now, Moffat had few educational advantages. Furthermore, he was not known for his great intelligence. It was said of him his progress was but slow, his hands often being made to suffer for the dullness of his brains. He lived amongst the shipping companies. This sparked a desire for the high seas. The captain of a particular ship came to be attached to Moffat, and with his parents' consent, he made several coastal trips on shipping vessels. After narrowly escaping death multiple times, to his parents' satisfaction, he retired from the sailing business. His schooling at Falkirk was for writing and booking, very different from his short time of excitement at sea. This was the last school Moffat ever attended. By age 14, he was a gardener's apprentice. During the time of his apprenticeship, he lived in a small bothy with 7 other men. A bothy is a small cottage with no running water. This, of course, would further prepare him for life in Africa. Moffat's apprenticeship was under the guidance of a man named John Robertson. Mr. Robertson was a just but hard man. The labor was severe and the food was little. In the bitter cold of the Scottish mornings, the men were required to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Moffat may have lacked high levels of intelligence, but he made up for it in stature. He was tall, strong, and had dark, piercing eyes. He was known for his ability to swim, even saving a friend who would have drowned without Moffat's help. Moffat remained in this apprenticeship until 1812. During this time, he also picked up other helpful skills. He learned some Latin. He learned mensuration. He learned the smith craft, and he learned some violin. He had a desire to learn whatsoever he could when the opportunity availed itself. Upon finishing his apprenticeship, he made his way to Donbristle. Here he excelled in athletics and entertained his companions each night with a performance on the violin. After 12 months, he found more permanent employment to Mr. Lee of High Lee in Cheshire. While living, working, and playing in Donbristle, he was able to visit his parents often, but this move to Cheshire would require him to say goodbye. Moffat's parents were deeply religious. They diligently adhered to a stern old Scottish piety. He recorded this final meeting in this way. When we came within sight of the spot where we were to part, perhaps never again to meet in this world, she said, "Now, my Robert, let us stand here for a few minutes, for I wish to ask one favor of you before we part, and I know you will not refuse to do whatever your mother asks." "What is it, mother?" I inquired. "Do promise me first that you will do what I am now going to ask, and I shall tell you." No, mother, I cannot till you tell me what your wish is. Oh, Robert, can you think for a moment that I shall ask you, my son, to do anything that is not right? Do not I love you? Yes, mother, I know you do, but I do not like to make promises which I may not be able to fulfill. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground. I was silent, trying to resist the rising emotion. She sighed deeply. I lifted my eyes and saw the big tears rolling down the cheeks, which were wont to press mine. I was conquered. And as soon as I could recover speech, I said, "Oh, mother, ask what you will, and I shall do it. I only ask you whether you will read a chapter in the Bible every morning and another every evening." I interrupted by saying, "Mother, you know I read my Bible." "I know you do, but you do not read it regularly, or as a duty you owe to God, its author." And she added, "Now I shall return home with a happy heart, inasmuch as you have promised to read the scriptures daily. Oh, Robert, my son, read much in the New Testament. Read much in the Gospels, the blessed Gospels, then you cannot well go astray." I parted from my beloved mother, now long gone to that mansion about which she loved to speak. I went on my way, and ere long found myself among strangers. My charge was an important one for a youth, and though possessing a muscular frame and a mind full of energy, it required all to keep pace with the duty which devolved upon me. I lived at a considerable distance from what are called the means of grace, and the Sabbaths were not always at my command. I met with none who appeared to make religion their chief concern. I mingled, when opportunities offered, with the gay and godless in what are considered innocent amusements, where I soon became a favorite, but I never forgot my promise to my mother. Robert Moffat reached High Lee December 1813. During his time there, he came under the influence of the Methodist Church. It had been some 22 years since the death of John Wesley, but Methodism was strong throughout the United Kingdom. This group of people would leave a deep impression on him. Ultimately, it was this group of concerned Methodists that led him to saving faith in Jesus Christ. Moffat was a responsible young man. This meant much of the work was left in his trust. Though he worked day and night, hard labor, he found time each night to study books. Miss Lee had taken an interest in Moffat. She would lend him books and encourage him to study them diligently. This left a serious impression on Moffat, ultimately leading to his conversion. His faithful mother had plowed ground and sowed seed that would now be cultivated, watered, and God gave the increase. The Wesleyan Methodists faithfully labored in High Lee. Moffat was invited to attend their meetings. After little time there, he became intimately aware of his sinful condition. After a short and severe struggle with this reality, he was pardoned. He was justified. He placed his trust in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. From that day forward, he devoted his life to the Lord Jesus Christ. With great zeal and energy, he joined the work of this group of Methodists. Moffat wrote home and thanked his dear mother for her faithfulness to the Lord. It surely prepared his young mind for meeting his Lord. Mr. and Miss Lee were not happy about this news. The Methodists were not favorably looked upon in these days. This point in Moffat's life produced a crossroads. His diligence in labor was nigh unto providing him a life of ease, but his zeal for the Lord would take him in a very different direction. Soon after these exciting events in Moffat's life, an insignificant matter would alter his course. A simple trip across town would start a series of events that turned the young gardener into the beloved missionary. But to learn more about that, you'll have to come back next week. With these ideas in mind, two very different worlds will soon collide. The ensuing violence of the Bushmen and the Dutch settlers, the exchange in government powers between the Dutch and the English, chaos in South Africa, where the kingdoms of this world take counsel together and violently maneuver for power. Contrasted with the simple life of a diligent gardener, God would have these two worlds to cross paths. The result would be miraculous. Robert Moffat was a faithful servant. I pray you will come back next week and learn more about this man and his ministry. Thank you for listening, and God bless. Now we're going to end this broadcast with a very special treat. A good friend of mine, Emma Strand, took a song that I wrote and she put it to music, and it came out absolutely beautiful. So I hope you'll take a few minutes and enjoy this. I hope it'll be a blessing to you.
Oh Bethany, what works we did see. His weeping voice gave great command, Lazarus, come forth. He that was dead came forth alive, many did believe. O Bethany, what works we did see. The alabaster box it broke, what humility. Anoint his head and then his feet, how precious is he. O Bethany, what works we did see. See ye not all these things of the temple built? Verily thrown down they will be, not one stone left. O Bethany, what works we did see. Lord, tell us please, privately, the sign of thy coming, and what shall be the end of the world that we see. O Bethany, what works we did see. The Lord commands, take ye heed, be not deceived, for many false Christs shall come, only to mislead. O Bethany, what works we did see. Oh, behold, we go up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man, he shall be delivered and condemned. O Gethsemane, O Gethsemane, what sorrow we did see! O my soul, exceedingly sorrowed unto death. Father, not as I will, only thy will be done. O Bethany, what victory we see. The risen Lord, he led them as far as Bethany. He parted there, leaving them carried into heaven. O Bethany, why gaze ye into heaven? The same Jesus taken up, ascending into heaven, shall so come in like manner, even so, Lord, come. O Bethany, what works we did see.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. You can learn more about our ministry by visiting www.plenteousredemption.com. You can hear more Plenteous Redemption podcast audio at www.plenteousredemption.media. Please comment below if this podcast has been a help to you. Also, inform us of future topics that would interest you. Thank you again for listening to the Plenteous Redemption podcast.